Hello world, this is Stefan of Lendergan Games. I now have the animations working properly. I'll be making a separate video on that soon. My next step from here is to figure out collisions and add a knight to the scene. Once I ultimately get things back to where they were before the game engine switch, I'll start working on a crossbowman and then visuals for ranged attacks. This latest stretch has been another series of red herrings, so I'm still recovering somewhat for being flustered for so long. With that said, it's time to promote my Patreon. Now that you know the link is in the description, let's move on. A lot of larger publishers seem to have forgotten that Sandbox is a style of game and not inherently a complement. Football, for example, needs its relatively tight boundaries and rules, and it would objectively become a worse game were players allowed to run into the stands, even if entertainment is legitimately added when spectators riot on the field. As a style, though, what makes a particular sandbox good? The player does. I know that sounds reductive, but sandbox-style games stand apart from others in their fundamental philosophy. Where most games are a set of rules, sandbox games are a set of tools. Thus, enjoying a sandbox requires initiative on the part of the player. The nuts and bolts of a good sandbox then involves rewarding player initiative. They accomplish that in two major ways: freedom of location and freedom of action. To set some clarity, when I say freedom, I mean it as freedom to do something rather than freedom from something. Similarly, I have a specific definition for freedom of location, which is freedom to be in different places. The rest of this part of the diatribe is about different locations, depending on what your definition of is. Nevertheless, let's meet our Goofus, Fallout 4 and Skyrim, both proudly exercising the same problem. Their primary problem in this regard is that all of the places look different but feel the same. All of the other problems I'm ignoring for now. Yes, they offer plenty of varied vistas, but the engagements within the areas change quite little. In Skyrim, you encounter wolves, bears, and bandits in the grassy regions, and white wolves, white bears, and the same bandits again in the snowy regions. There's a slight difference with topography in that you encounter trolls, or white trolls, in the mountains, but the snowy regions ultimately end up being 9/10 the same environment as the grassy regions, with only a difference in color palette. The evildoer layers are even more congruent. You fight either bandits, anorexic bandits, or mechanical bandits. If you're lucky, you'll find monsters to also fight, namely trolls, spiders, and mechanical spiders. Furthermore, the layers all follow the pattern of leading to a set piece and then looping back to the entrance, making them feel the same as they vary between only 3 different coats of paint. Replace trolls and spiders with super mutant and giant crabs, and you have Fallout 4. For Gallant, I'm narrowing down the selection to just Morrowind and Mountain Blight Warband. For Morrowind, despite how ubiquitous the cliff racers are, the swamplands have land-bound fauna, the volcano has mutated zombies, and the area around demon ruins has low-tier demons. Yes, you're inevitably fighting things, but the things actually feel differently from each other. Additionally, the cities feel differently from each other. Whereas in Skyrim, the cities are small areas with merely different coats of paint. The act of traversing Vivec is different from traversing Balmora, is different from traversing Ebonheart, is different from traversing Sadrith Mora. Whereas in Skyrim's Windhelm, Markarth, and Morthal, the difference is placement of buildings and stairs. In Morrowind's Vivec, Ebonheart, and Sadrith Mora, Vivec has massive multi-tiered buildings with stairs within and bridges between. Ebonheart is a castle with a walkway that circles the place, and Sadrith Mora is a group of towers. Meanwhile, in Warband, the geological regions are compounded with politics. The player knows if he's in the forest, bandits are largely archers, in the steppes they're horse archers, in the mountains they're sledgehammer swingers, and so forth. And to add to that, the player has to keep in mind whether or not the civilized places will even accept the character as a friend or reject the character as a political enemy. Thus proves that politics enhance every game ever made. And I'll just drop the mic into a trash compactor on that one and move on. Ultimately, the key to freedom of location is that the various places are functionally different environments. If the player benefits from paying attention to the type of location, it is a real expansion to the sandbox's real estate. More than simply acreage, the size of a sandbox is expanded by its diversity. And embracing diversity is what makes us a welcoming and exciting place to work. As for freedom of action, a large, diverse sandbox isn't a lot of fun if you can't build sandcastles or bury your younger brother or any of the other victims. Proper freedom of action is a lot harder to define because, like I said in my defense of classes and role-playing games, a game is a distilled experience. So what action should and shouldn't be allowed depends on what experience is being presented. With Goofus, both games actively hinder player initiative, Kathy Bates style. In Skyrim, the player is free to do anything as long as it doesn't interfere with the obnoxiously mediocre plot, nor the hardware limitations of the Xbox 360. Every 10th NPC dumps busy work on the hero of the land, whom is endowed with the soul of the writer, and several places are locked off until he has been expressly told to go there. Lockpicking technically exists in Skyrim, but only as a little bonus for having the skill. When you arrive at a set piece too early, the lock declares that it needs a MacGuffin, a key to open it, leaving the player to rationalize to himself what makes this lock different from all the other locks, which apparently don't need keys. Similarly with combat, some NPCs are immortal. Granted, the reasons really do enhance the sandbox, those being that the plot must go on, and respawning the cast just isn't an option. Yes, everything else respawns, but shut up, it just works. Meanwhile, in Fallout 4, even progressing in the obnoxiously mediocre plot has problems, because it stops you at points to play SimCity instead of Fallout. Even outside of that, every step taken towards the arbitrary plot twist requires lobotomizing your character with the hacksaw of righteousness and compassion. In the freedom of action category, Skyrim looks even worse when compared to Morrowind. In Morrowind, spells are a combination of spell effects, and you can combine and tweak effects in any way that you want. I often siphon massive amounts of health from myself because I prefer to consume only the strong. Furthermore, Morrowind has movement skills that the player can enhance through use, and since spells can be converted into enchantments, the player can eventually become faster than a speeding bullet, more powerful than a locomotive, and able to leap tall buildings in a single bound. Freedom of movement actually ties into action rather than location because the method of getting from point A to point B is a separate experience unto itself. See that mountain? Well, we didn't make a climbing animation, but here are spells for jumping and flying. Of course, those got removed from Oblivion and Skyrim, lest someone fly over an Xbox-designated loading screen. Warbands allowed actions, meanwhile, are a totally separate side to the question of what action should be allowed in a sandbox. While Morrowind's experience revolves around ascendancy into godhood, with the results being a bit mechanically more on the nose than intended, Warband's experience revolves around becoming a leader among men. As such, while brewing potions and maintaining equipment work for becoming a one-man army, it is unnecessary for assembling an actual army. Conversely, poring over finance and inventory reports are appropriate tasks for a general, but not for a titan. On a completely different note, thanks to their ubiquity, crafting mechanics need addressing. First off, crafting is popular because Minecraft proved that, yes, it does reward player initiative. It has since then become an easy means of reward, but it still has to answer the fundamental question of whether it adds to the experience. Minecraft implemented it successfully by making it a versatile means of reshaping the landscape, which works for what's not inaccurately called digital Legos. The main problem with most so-called survival games with crafting mechanics is that the crafting often becomes not a means of reward so much as mandatory busy work for not losing outright. Every player has their own limit on how much they can grind, and when I'm willing to grind, what reward will this game give me that Morrowind doesn't already?